Welcome to Critical Culture. I am Travis, and today we are starting up a posse. Okay, we're actually not starting up a posse, but Trump is. Trump is taking National Guardmen to form his own personal posse to rampage in blue cities across the United States. A tour hopefully not coming to you anytime soon. Unfortunately, this is the most popular thing they are doing in America right now, so I can just about guarantee we're going to see more of it. A poll I was looking at the other day had every single policy and pursuit of the Trump administration below water with favorability, while his get tough approach on crime cracked the 50% mark and made it to 53% approval, showing that there's not enough people that actually know what's going on, the impact this is having, and where it could lead. So far, we've had the National Guard and the Marines, in one case, deployed in places where it wasn't asked for or welcome or told it wasn't wanted. In one of those places in California, a federal judge actually deemed it was unconstitutional and could not be done. And Washington, D.C., there's a little bit more gray area. In fact, a lot more gray area because it's not a state. It is our capital. It is Washington, D.C. So federalizing there has a little bit more leeway than other places. A great place to try and justify its use and show how great it can be to have a soldier standing around the National Mall where there really isn't much crime at the cost of about $1 million a day to deploy just over 2,000 troops as kind of a test bed to get the idea back on its feet. You know, you get Guard members from all these willing Southern GOP states that are happy to have the governors send their troops up there to Washington, D.C. and clean up the problem. And now apparently they've got their sights set on bigger places like Chicago and Baltimore, potentially even New York City. The targeting they choose is clearly not based on facts and numbers. If you look at heat maps of crime, good places they should go would be the Southwest and the rural South in terms of the per capita violent crime. But again, that doesn't play well with our misconception about crime in the cities and how we kind of, in general, not just with crime, but in general, we just kind of overlook rural America. A lot of us, in fact, don't know what it's like in rural America. We just know what we see in the big cities we live in and what we see on TV, which is primarily big cities. But yes, rural communities have a ton of crime as well, depending on where you're at. So again, now Illinois is barking back and doesn't want the troops there. And today we're going to get into a little bit of the history behind where this has happened before, because it has happened, why it could be legal in some cases, or in this case, likely is not legal and not wanted. And I guess the roots of where this comes from. And let's start there. So the roots of this, I think a lot of it goes all the way back to the founding fathers and the American Revolution. During the debate about the Constitution, there was a group, the anti-federalists, that disliked the idea of too much power in the federal government, including people like Thomas Jefferson. I believe he's the third president of the United States. They were the primary group opposed to a standing army. And you would ask, well, Travis, why were they opposed to that? Well, they were opposed to it because they saw it as a threat to liberty. There was this idea that a standing army was this existential threat to liberties, both on the individual and state level. And again, we've got the United States. We want this, not just separation of powers at the major branch, but there's the federal, state, and local. And we don't want too much power at the federal government. And they thought, if we had this permanent military force, it could easily be used by a tyrannical government. Case in point, Donald Trump. Against the people to suppress dissent, enforce unpopular laws, or dismantle democratic institutions. And I think, some of that fear is real. We've also seen that Trump and company Doge and Elon Musk have been able to dismantle some democratic institutions that we've formed without even using the National Guard. Imagine what they could accomplish if they normalized the use of the National Guard and it slowly got more and more severe. Like at first, hey, it's a bunch of troops posing in the National Mall with nobody around. It's kids coming up and saying hi. That's all great. But then all of a sudden, there's a little bit of stuff going on. But it's violent criminals, right? And trust us, it's all violent criminals. So we can do this, and what happens is you can push the envelope further and further as you normalize one step of bad behavior. Then the second step, it's only one step further, and you've taken a step before. And the third step, well, that's only one step further, and you've taken a step before. The next thing you know, you're across the Potomac with guns blazing, and you're taking out anything that moves. So it may seem somewhat innocuous at first, but that is absolutely how you would go about it if you wanted to do something like that. In Germany, what they did with some of these concentration camps and forced labor camps and death camps, some of them started as just, this is a reservation. We're going to send people here. They're going to do exercise. We're going to make them better. They're going to do a bunch of exercise. And it got more and more severe until it got up to the point that they committed the Holocaust, right? So even if it seems innocuous at first, this is how it happens. Slowly over time, it gets worse and worse, and none of the steps seem that drastically different from what happened before that you want to do anything about them, or you feel more inclined to do something about it than you did before. So they were concerned about, again, dismantling democratic institutions, enforcing unpopular laws. It starts off regularly innocuous. You're going for the worst of the criminals in terms of immigrants with ICE, for example. But then the next step, what's actually happening, and you're hearing about all over the place, is you get people that are a part of the system that did do it right, that are getting their status pulled and they're getting deported at a moment's notice. And businesses are suffering and families are suffering and the community is suffering because now they've gone a step further. And then the step after that is, well, we will hold them in Alligator Alcatraz and we're just going to hold them there. And never mind the fact that the cost of this is much more than it takes to take care of people actually in need in our country, which we don't have the money for, but we have the money to victimize some people that don't belong in Alligator Alcatraz or any prison anywhere. So this is a good example there on the ICE side, how it increases and increases, and then it's citizens that are talking out about this. Well, their papers are getting pulled by ICE, by people in authority in places, and they don't even identify themselves. Like, that sounds a lot like secret police to me. And the secret police is not a good thing if you look in the history of autocratic governments. Right. So the warning signs are all around, but this is specifically with standing army. One of the arguments against it was the effects on liberty and personal freedom and how it could be used by a tyrannical federal government controlling it to do things that we don't want it to do. There's other things in there like financial burden on the country, which we have a huge defense budget, and reliance on militias. Well, the whole concept of not having a federal army, that's just an anachronism. That is not going to happen. We need a military in the United States to remain a free country and protect ourselves. No question about it. It is going to be expensive. No question about it. So those aren't concerns. We need to have a military, but we need to have our military focused not on people within, but people outside of our borders. Because when we look at each other as the enemy, nothing good can come from that. At the end of the day, if you're on the right or the left-hand side of the aisle, we're all under the same roof. It's not supposed to be used to deal with domestic crime or anything like that. It's allowed to be used to suppress rebellion, to enforce federal laws or restore order when state authorities are unable or unwilling to do so. And there's been enough order that things have been getting better, actually, in a lot of these places. And again, it is better in these places than a lot of the places they're not targeting. So none of these sound like valid arguments to bring in the National Guard or the Marines or any sort of federal government to go in and take care of domestic crime, that we want locally accountable officials to take care of that sort of thing, right? Mayors in control of police forces or police chiefs, whoever is elected and appointed who by who, with local oversight to deal with local issues. And that's the way it's supposed to work. So, early in our government, this was done time and again. There was the Whiskey Rebellion, New York City draft riots to oppose the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln sent in battle-hardened troops to end some deadly riots. The labor disputes, and this is probably some of the most ugly uses of it, throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, like the end of the Gilded Age, when labor unions were fighting back against gross inequality and winning battles for the common man, for the laborers, for the workers of the United States. Throughout this period, presidents and governments frequently deployed the military, right? These business owners were like, hey, we've got a labor strike. Our whole company is down. We're losing money here. You need to send in the National Guard. And the National Guard came in and they killed people. Like, this is ugly. This is exactly what they're not supposed to do. By this point in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we had just passed the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. So a little context here, you probably heard of this if you're aware of the topic, but it's funny, but this act basically set up these rules around not using the federal troops for domestic and law enforcement things that should be taken care of locally. And I think anyone who's at all concerned about how the National Guard is being used in these cases is aware of this. What's the really funny part is this was right after the Civil War, and the national or federal troops were going into the South to try to support the rights, right, to protect the rights of newly freed slaves against white supremacist violence and resistance. So here was a case where the federal government was going in to protect the rights of black people down there, and the southern states actually got this passed that said, you can't do that. You can't send the federal troops into the South. This is a states' rights versus federal rights issue, and you can't do that, not even to enforce and protect the civil rights of newly freed slaves. And it got passed. So ugly reason for it, but a very good law that I wish we could find a way to really enforce. Unfortunately, enforcement of laws comes down to the executive branch, and until enough people within the executive branch could stand up, or Congress in its oversight role, or the courts and Congress together, or enough people protesting to get some of these other people off their ass and understand that this is not going to go over well. We're not going to accept this. Until that happens, they seem to be actually getting away with it now. I joked to someone I was talking about this with the other day and said, well, can't Chicago just get a restraining order? Like, if you're in an abusive relationship and you know that you're likely to be abused again, you can go to the courts and get a restraining order. Now, obviously, yes, it is nice to have that protection when it works well, but it's not a fail-safe because it doesn't actually prevent. It just makes it easier for someone to like call the cops. But the point is, at this point, a federal court has determined doing this in California was illegal. There should be some way to stop this from happening outside of hoping and wishing and praying and hoping it doesn't happen. A lot of the other cases in here were cases where the troops and the National Guard were called up by the states. So that's a little bit different. That's kind of a governor's prerogative to address things. And I don't know the ins and outs in your state, my state, or any state. But I know that governors have some authority to deal with their own National Guard, but for the federal government to be able to do that, it should not be happening. But some of it, like the Kent State University is included there, where the Ohio National Guard was deployed to Kent State. And on May 4th, the guardsmen opened fire on the students, killing 4 of them and wounding 9. And this is dark days, like college kids just protesting and getting shot. And I know people that I volunteer with that were in college at the time, and they remember just how much that shook them. And I hope it doesn't have to come to something like that, an incident where people will start to pay attention to this or realize that we do need to mobilize against this and rally public support against nationalizing the federal or the National Guard and going into states where they're not wanted for reasons that it isn't justified. So what to do about this? For me, it does start with nonviolence. Like look at the gains made by like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and their movements. And the core of that really is that a nonviolent approach. The Martin Luther King's movement was a victim of a lot of attacks, a lot of ugliness, but in the end, it was their ability to do things the right way and not strike back in a violent way, or trying to be positive about your cause and not necessarily fighting against the cops that were there. But they had when people see that, it becomes clear like who's right and wrong, and just morally, I think most people will see that and they'll say, look, that person is just, they're protecting their rights. They're just standing there and you're going to be shooting them with rubber bullets at like point blank range. That's not right. And then people start to die. Like that's definitely not right. So nonviolence is the start of it. The next step, I think, understand that a lot of the National Guardsmen and people involved in this may not necessarily be happy about it. I would hope that if it got to a certain point, more of them would stand up for what they believe in if they're not for this, because that is their duty, is to protect and defend the Constitution, not anybody in any elected office or unelected position, but the Constitution and the liberties of all of the people of the United States and the rule of law, all that good stuff. I know already a lot of these people aren't happy being there. Even if they're somewhat ambivalent about some of it, they're being deployed and pulled out of their jobs. They're probably getting late pay because the Doge fired half the people and their checks aren't getting out on time. They don't have proper places to stay or food to eat. And like, just recognize the humanity of a lot of the people in this situation that are a part of it, but feel it's beyond them and too big for them. And for now, at least, they have to do what they have to do. And in some regards, better that people like that are involved to be a like advocate for sanity and civility on both sides of the equation. So keep that in mind and don't automatically put the sins of Donald Trump putting these troops in places on the people that end up getting caught in the situations. That's going to help with the nonviolence. It's going to lower the amount of violence coming from the other side if it eventually does come from the other side in an untoward way. But understand the humanity of everyone involved in the situations. And then, know your rights. There's a lot of ways to find out your rights right now. There's a lot of fun shorts on the internet telling you like a lot of safety precautions if you get involved in protests, or if you are out there documenting what you see and streaming it or putting it out on the internet somewhere so it's documented so that it doesn't just get whitewashed by mass media, but that there's actual content out there that people can find. So I think seeing it is believing it. And if you're out there documenting with the intent to display some of the problems being caused, just be very safe and very cautious. Know your rights, know how to protect yourself. With that, best of luck, Chicago. Best of luck, Washington, D.C., and everywhere where the National Guard is and isn't. And best of luck to everyone in the United States and elsewhere, because these are interesting times for sure. If you listen if you listened this far, that means you like the podcast a little bit, and I'd encourage you to check out some of my other episodes. And if you enjoy one, please like and subscribe. Leave reviews on the other channels. I'm early enough in my podcast experience that I'm not noticing a ton of traffic yet, but that's okay. Just practicing and getting better. So any feedback you can give me about what you like, what you don't like, I'm more than happy to listen and appreciate whatever you can do. Thanks for listening.